A World Made New, all of the books in their own ways are a surprise to me. It's a surprise that they actually happen, although it shouldn't be because there's so many of them now. The very first book, I Am the Word, I think somewhere they said, eventually we intend to talk about reality and how your world operates. And I was thinking, well, they're never going to get to there because I'm never going to be able to bring that stuff through. It's too far out for me. And they did, and I think you're right. I think each one of the books in some ways is like a rung on a ladder, and you sort of get to one place and you sort of are worked with energetically, and then you're ready to go to the next one. I don't think that that means that the books all need to have to be read or read in order. People actually jump around or enter into a new book and then find themselves so interested they go back to the others. And the guides have always said they teach in a one-room schoolhouse, so they're meeting their students where they arrive and at the level that they can move into an energetic accordance with what they teach. But I was aware with this book that it was the last of a trilogy, and they said it would complete the teachings that began with I Am the Word. And I also think of all of these books as one teaching. And I think now, in preparation for where they want to take us after that.
Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I have the one and only Paul Selig, and I'm very excited to talk to him. The amazing book, A World Made New, completes the Manifestation Trilogy, the 12th book that Paul Selig has written. We've had Paul on the show a number of times, and I was excited to read this book because it really felt like the culmination of all of the other channelings. And what I found exciting was that this felt like a conclusion to the first book, I Am the Word, and it really, when you look at all the books that Paul's written, it feels like this has all been one gigantic book. And this was sort of the ending of the first book. And so I was very excited to get a chance to talk to Paul. So welcome to the Reality Revolution, Paul. How you doing?
I'm okay. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's been a little while since we talked. First, how have you been? What's been going on? How's it been going in your life?
I think it's been going fine. I've since channeled yet another book, which is a whole other teaching that they're starting on.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to work on a memoir, which is something I've never done before. And I haven't done my own writing in years because the guides books come through so quickly. And that's not really a creative process for me. It really is much more the process of being a dictaphone or a radio for their teaching. So getting back into my own work is a whole other experience. So that's where I've been.
Yeah, I'm sure it's quite interesting. You mentioned in the book that you had suffered from, writer's block when you were
Mhm.
trying to be a writer, and
Yeah.
it's surprising to you how easy it is to that these channelings come through, right?
Well, there's no writing involved in the channel books. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not sitting there typing as I hear. The channel books are all spoken, they're all delivered through me and recorded. And the last, I don't know, 8 or 9 books, I think, have all been done in front of audiences, start to finish. Whether online or in person, and they're filmed and transcribed, and the transcriptions become the book unedited.
Hmm.
So it's a very arduous process for me, but it's very, very different than sitting there facing a blank page. I when people tell me they love the books, I go, that's really nice, but my name is on the cover, but I didn't write them, so I don't really claim that kind of ownership. I claim affiliation with them as maybe a co-author or collaborator because I don't think they could come through without my willingness to sit there and take the dictation. But yeah, I had the worst writer's block of anybody I've ever met in my life. And I was teaching writing and running a graduate writing program through much of that. So this is a very big difference for me.
Well, tell me, as a fellow student to these amazing channelings,
Uh,
which essentially have been written together, linking together. If anybody has followed these books, they're energetic activations of a sort that
mhm.
link each other together and carry this one teaching. So I would love to get your impressions of that book and what you thought of it and what you took from it.
A World Made New, all of the books in their own ways are a surprise to me. It's a surprise that they actually happen, although it shouldn't be because there's so many of them now. The very first book, I Am the Word, I think somewhere they said, eventually we intend to talk about reality and how your world operates. And I was thinking, well, they're never going to get to there because I'm never going to be able to bring that stuff through. It's too far out for me. And they did, and I think you're right. I think each one of the books in some ways is like a rung on a ladder, and you sort of get to one place and you sort of are worked with energetically, and then you're ready to go to the next one. I don't think that that means that the books all need to have to be read or read in order. People actually jump around or enter into a new book and then find themselves so interested they go back to the others. And the guides have always said they teach in a one-room schoolhouse, so they're meeting their students where they arrive and at the level that they can move into an energetic accordance with what they teach. But I was aware with this book that it was the last of a trilogy, and they said it would complete the teachings that began with I Am the Word. And I also think of all of these books as one teaching. And I think now, in preparation for where they want to take us after that, which is kind of surprising to me as well. I wasn't sure. I mean, they've said, I was going to say I wasn't sure there would be more books, but they've said, there are more books. And even when I was thinking, oh, maybe this is the last one, which I've thought ever since the second book or the third book, there can't be anything more to this. The teaching's done. There's nothing more for them to say. They seem to have a lot to say, and they continue to push the envelope of what I think is possible in the teachings, and I think preparing us for where they would like us to have an experience of reality, which is the upper room, which is what they teach, and which is, they say, the octave above the common field, or reality as we have known it. So I was, on one level, relieved that this book was written and that it did feel like a completion, and then a little stymied because I didn't know what they would do after that. As usual, they had something to talk about, and they did. And I think they spoke about it very well, and we'll see what the book is like when it comes out next year.
Well, I'm super excited to read it to see where they take it from here.
Mhm.
They're really talking about what's going to happen, and there's a hopeful sort of vision of the future. There's a little some unique changes a little bit. I mean, it's not necessarily like everything's going to be wonderful. It's just that this idea that the world will be made new. And so I wanted to get your impressions of how they're starting to slowly reveal, what will happen in our future on this planet.
They don't do predictions as I like or others would like. I mean,
Right.
they do say some pretty crazy things, I think, in the last book well, actually, that's the book that's not even out yet. They get even farther out when they talk about what happens in the world.
Yeah.
They have said since the very beginning that humanity is at a time of reckoning, and a reckoning is a facing of the self and all of one's creations, and that we have choices about how we move forward. And they have said explicitly that humanity as a collective, like a collective soul, has decided to progress beyond the ways that we have been operating in separation. So they're moving us, or we're being moved through our own agreement and choice, to a kind of unity consciousness, or an awareness of the inherent divinity in all things and everything we see and experience. How that plays out, I suspect, is going to be in different ways. We're still, I feel, in a period where things are being seen and revealed and structures are collapsing. And they've been talking about this for the last number of years, the structures that we have been in accordance with, in attendance to, and participatory to the creation of, are moving, are releasing and relaxing and changing. When they talked about reckoning so many years ago, they said, everything that holds its basis in fear is going to need to be reclaimed in a higher way. So if you can imagine that the cement that holds the bricks together in the building you're in everything's plastered together with fear, that building may not stand or may need to be built on a different foundation. And that's, I think, where we're going in terms of the politics of the time, the medicine of the time, the religion of the time. I mean, they talk about all of these things as structures that we're participatory to, and that the best that we can and have been able to imagine is born in what exists in what they call the common field, or the reality that we know, and the possibilities that are inherent within that, which is based on a very, very long legacy of our participation. And we think that these things will not be changed or will not be moved because they have not been. But they say when we move in consciousness to what they call the upper room, which is the next level of vibration or a chord available to us, other things become possible because we're not ordering off of the old menu of what we've known. And that's what I think they say is going to happen. So, they've said if we want to learn the futility of war by blowing ourselves up to kingdom come, we still can. But they don't really see that happening. Or they say humanity will survive, the species will move forward. Does that mean it's going to be a pretty shift? I don't necessarily think so. They don't talk about some great awakening where all of a sudden the light bulb goes off on everybody and we're all dancing and hugging each other in the streets. I don't know that it experiences itself out that way. But they have said, and they've said it for a while now, that we're in a process, and it's going to take about 4 generations for this to begin to appear, as something manifest in consciousness, and we're looking still at a reseeing of what we have created. They say nothing can be changed until it's seen. So this process of exhumation, which they began talking about in the Book of Truth, which was maybe 6 books ago or something, they said, imagine that, your backyard has become an excavation site, and what was buried 5 weeks ago is coming to the surface, and 5,000 years ago as well. And the purpose is not to point fingers and blame and scream, and make it somebody else's fault. It's the opportunity to re-see it. The guides have said thousands of times now, what you put in darkness holds you in the darkness, keeps you in that darkness. And so we get to see what we have held in darkness, who we've held and what we've held within ourselves, culturally, systemically. And those things are having to be seen in order to be reframed or reknown in a higher way. And the process of looking at your crap isn't always very pretty. And I think we're still in that.
Yeah, they state a couple of times, which I resonated with, is that this process is not going to mean all the bad stuff we thought about is going to go away. We're going to have to confront all this stuff that we have been creating all this time, and we're in this process of sort of confronting everything, and they're sort of guiding us in the ways that we can confront these things from our past creations.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we've managed to pretend collectively for a long time that we didn't have to look at things. We didn't have to look at oppression and racism and, the schisms that are created and the factions that are created that, bring people to war. But we have to if we're going to move beyond it. Because, I mean, the New Agers, and I'm not a very good New Ager, I'm afraid, but they like to say, well, you create everything, you personally. And I actually hear that while we are co-creators, we're also collectively creating a reality.
Mhm.
How our consciousness informs what we see claims its value or its meaning. And the process of moving beyond the old way is actually a process of reseeing. And it's revelatory. I think it's very positive, but I don't think it's necessarily comfortable.
Now, the guides in this book speak to something I think that's going to be even more, 4 generations from now, really profound. And there's what I felt like that they're talking about the fact that when we're personalized individual identities and that we enter into the monad, the divine all, and that we often have this fear of losing ourself in as we merge back into the monad. And I felt a lot of this book was speaking to that, speaking to the idea that we're going to face this fear. Like, I don't want to let go of my individual personality and who I am individually as we merge into this unity consciousness.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And the book that they just dictated is called Divine Union. So it's really about what happens at that level of realization. So the guides have been explicit about this. I mean, one of the first things that I ever heard as a channel when I was just opening up in my early 30s was, and I was suffering. And I always have to say I'm 99% sure I heard this in channel because I wrote it on a slip of paper because I didn't understand it and stuck it in the book that was by my bed at the time. And what I heard was freedom comes when the throne relinquishes its king. I didn't know what that meant, but it really does mean what aspect of self sits in the throne, who's running the show. Is it the personality self or the divine self? Now, the personality has its place, but the personality seems to think it's God, and I don't get that that's the case. So when people run around and say, I've just realized that I'm God, well, there's a partial truth there. You are of God and an aspect of God, but the part of you that would claim to be the only one is the part of you that's screwing with you, and creating all the mayhem. So I understand that the personality self is also shifted. I don't think that the personality becomes realized. I don't think this is about divinizing the personality self or the ego, but I do think it moves into its rightful place. So what makes you uniquely you and me uniquely me is still present. We're not abandoning. I don't know that I'm ever gonna, want to go out and play basketball. Maybe one day, but that's just not what I like to do with my time. Somebody else loves that and they wouldn't be very sad without it. I think what makes us uniquely us stays. But if you think about like a snowflake, once the thing, and it's unique, once it melts, it's in a puddle with the rest of them and it's made of the same stuff. So our unique fingerprints, I think, remain, which is our, in some ways, character, I suppose, or essence at a level. But I also think that we undergo a process where the personality isn't commandeering our choices. Because the personality self only knows itself through the data of history. It doesn't know itself really in the ever-present now. That moment of now is almost beyond time and space as we understand it. So we can have other experiences there.
The thing that I took from that was while they're saying that we will move into this unity consciousness, at the same time when we're in the upper room, we keep our body. It just sort of upgrades. So
Yeah.
we're not losing our body, and they emphasize that at the same time. They're trying to explain this very unique distinction of and for many it's not going to matter until 4 generations from now when it's really at its head. It feels like they're speaking to us years and years from now, right?
Yes and no. In the very first book, I Am the Word, they said something to the effect of, you are the first generation, that is coming to prepare the way for those who will follow.
Hmm.
So I do think that the work that is happening now is in some ways claiming a potential that can then be realized by others. The guides say when you operate at this level of vibration, your presence in being is supporting the awakening of 1,000 more just through being, not through proselytizing or teaching or anything else. It's just the level of vibration that you're operating at. They've said that the upper room is another octave of vibration. I suspect they're bringing us into the first lowest note that we can get to there, which is probably the highest we can attain at this point.
Hmm.
And they do prepare the body as well. So the exclusion of the body in many teachings seems to be, to them at least, a problem. They say if your body is not holy, how can you know the holiness of the earth or the sea? It's all one thing. It's all source expressing itself in different ways. So the body is addressed from the very first book, and the attunements that they bring through, I am word through my body. They say that the word is the energy of the creator in action. In later books, they call it the one-note song, which is in manifestation as all things. And when they claim, I know who I am, I know what I am, I know how I serve, which is another attunement, the what is form, manifestation. I know what I am. It's not, I know I'm Paul and I'm a channel. I know I'm Paul and I'm this age. I know I'm Paul and I have a beard and I lost my hair. I mean, those things are all momentarily true, but they're not the essence of who I am. I know what I am is manifestation of source. And when they work with that in classes, which they do, they actually have people sending and receiving that energy of the what. And it's fascinating to feel. You can literally feel the vibrational field just rolling out, and claiming what it encounters. It's really, really interesting. And that's one of the things I like about their teachings is everything that they've taught, in my experience, can be proven out in some way that you can actually have your own experience of. Because I'm not a spiritual teacher, I'm not a guru, and I really don't care if people believe in what comes out of my mouth or not. I had to get past that, I just show up and do my stuff. But if people can have their own experience of this, I think it's extraordinary. And I think that's what matters, finally. Finally, it's your own experience of this. So the body and the rest of us is all brought to what they call the upper room. And they've said that the upper room is the highest level of vibration that we can hold while maintaining form. Or Christ consciousness would be another way of putting it. They've called it that as well. And that there are other notes beyond the upper room, there are other octaves beyond the upper room, beyond what we can fathom. They say that they exist beyond the upper room, but they meet us there. That's where they can meet us for this instruction, because they're without form. They don't have the requirement of bodies to do what they do.
It's such a voluminous piece of work with all the books. It's hard to remember everything they said, but I really felt like they spoke a little bit more about themselves in this one, talking about Melchizedek and who they've been, and implying that some of the Melchizedek had actually taken form, and what in the process that they had gone through. And I found that fascinating as well. I was wondering what your thoughts were as they sort of slowly revealed themselves as a part of this teaching, because they've never really wanted to talk about themselves very
I don't,
much over.
I don't remember it, truthfully. I retain about maybe a third of what comes out of me. You may know the books better than I do. I can speak to the larger points because I often have to. I've always been uncomfortable with the announcement of names, and
Right.
not just their name, but any names. And I think some of that is the kind of egoic attachment that gets foisted on stuff. When I was new to this kind of work in my 30s and starting to do a little group in my apartment, you'd hear things like, wow, this is New York City, wow, the Archangel Michael is channeling on the Upper West Side on Thursday, but you really got to go to Brooklyn and hear Gabriel because that's the hot one. And I'm thinking, what is this stuff? It's was kind of like celebrity guides. And I think finally the truth of any teaching is in the teaching itself. Anybody can call themselves anybody, and I've heard people do it. I am, Mary Magdalene, and I am here to tell you about the Illuminati and the terrible things happening in Las Vegas right now around the corner from where I live. I go, okay, well, maybe, maybe that's the case. I'm not going to knock it, but it feels a little convenient. And I don't think that a high-level guide is necessarily operating at that level where they care, whether your kid gets into the better private school or the less good private school. I think that they have larger issues to teach and around our learning. When I was first given a name, and I asked early on, there was another name that came through first when I was just beginning to open up. And it felt like a placeholder more than anything else. And then when I first began to hear, the first name that I heard was the priest, and then the high priest, which is Melchizedek was the high priest of Jerusalem. That name came through another person, and I always have been disappointed that somebody else said that before I heard it myself. And when they confirmed the identity, which was I think before the books came, I was uncomfortable speaking it because it felt loaded. And they still announce themselves on occasion, we are, and blah, blah, blah. The guy that I see, when I've seen him, there's one that I've seen periodically over the years, usually in meditation or under hypnosis, he shows up. I often think that if I meditated every day, I'd see him every day, but I don't. And he shows up in a rather classic way, and as I understand, other people have seen him as well with a great big hat. very tall hat, long beard, and very, very beautiful, beautiful blue eyes, so pale and compassionate. And when I channel and the guides step into me fully, which they do at times when they want to work with people one on one or have me stand and see the whole group, they step in and they look through my eyes. And everybody reports that my eyes run blue, which they're not, they're hazel. So, whoever it is, let me put it that way, they don't teach fear. They don't seem to hold bias as I might. They often say things that I'm confounded by, but only because it doesn't serve my personality self's edicts about how things should be. And I have to say, it all feels true. The woman who channeled Course in Miracles, and that was purportedly Jesus speaking to her, she was a psychology professor at Columbia at the time. And I'm not a student of the Course. And I tried to look at it when I was in maybe my early 30s, and I just didn't go there with it. It wasn't any criticism. I thought it was beautiful. But she was quoted as saying about the work that came through her, "I don't believe it, but I know it's true." And I thought, that's right. That feels so right. And that's basically how I relate to it as well.
Yeah, you've always sort of carried a shock and like like sort of you've done your best not to be too much of a gatekeeper, and and we've seen you in the process as you're channeling. You're sometimes questioning what they're saying, and so I've always found your interaction with the guides as you're channeling to be an interesting part of the transcripts when I was reading them.
Yeah. I can't not do it only because if I hear something that feels too far out there or that I just don't understand or the sentence was clumsy as it came out of my mouth, I feel like I need to question it. 85% of the time they will answer it at the time. Paul interrupts the teaching and then they'll go to the answer or they'll elaborate on their point. Once in a while, which I actually prefer, they'll say, Paul has a question, we will take it up with him later. And they'll barrel through. And I love that because they're reminding me that they're in charge, that this is their teaching, it's not mine. And I worry sometimes, this used to happen a lot in the early years. Oh my God, am I going to be able to hear? Am I going to be able to hear? Is this going to come through? There's all these people waiting in the room. I don't know what's going to happen. And they would generally say, you sit, we teach, which I like.
Mhm.
And when I keep running that tape, can I do this? Is this going to be okay? Will I be able to hear? Finally, they'll say, okay, we'll sit, you teach, which shuts me right up because I can't do it. You can't try to channel. It's not possible. It's either happening or it's not. It's like a water spigot. It's running or it's not. You can't pretend it's not, doesn't work. At least it doesn't work that way for me, maybe somebody else. So, the interruptions are what they are. I was channeling in Costa Rica at a retreat maybe 2.5 weeks ago, and they did one lecture completely without whispering and repeat, without because I
Yeah.
whisper and repeat. I didn't realize it. I had no idea that I wasn't whispering and repeating until people said, wow, that came through all direct. And I was like, wow, that's fascinating. I don't remember a thing. And that's what happens when they go direct. Direct, I can't interrupt it. I don't remember what they said. It becomes sound to me. I know the sound is words, and I know the words have meaning, but I'm so in the moment making the words, the vowels, the consonants that make the words. It's all experientially sound to me. I'm aware that they're lecturing, I'm aware that it's happening, but I can't retain. And I think a part of me likes to be able to interrupt. And simply put, because, as I said, my name is on the cover of these books, and I don't want to be part of something that's too confusing to be understood or inaccurate. And, we don't go back and edit to polish, we don't pretty it up. And take out the phrase that might be politically incorrect to some. You know, if it comes out of my mouth, it's in the book. Maybe 3 or 4 words in any volume are changed because I mispronounce the words. And it's clear when you go back over the recordings, you know. So that's it.
Yeah, I've mentioned to you before, one of the fascinating parts of listening to the books is when you do the energetic attunements, where you usually sometimes you'll say an affirmation and then you and I love those parts. I can tell when it's about to happen, and I'll slow it down and I'll just like sometimes I'll do it with them, and you explain this. They explain this time that I was being played like a flute
Oh,
to
interesting.
right. They said just allow it to be like you're being played like a flute. And I was like, the light bulb went on, and now I understood sort of what they were doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so when you're recording the audiobook, it's happening again because you're tuning it. How does that
It's
happen?
interesting with the audiobooks because I'm very aware of that. So when a lecture is channeled, I'm whispering and repeating. The audiobooks are me reading from
Hmm.
the transcript that will be printed. And when they tone, they do the energetic attunement through sound. First of all, during the reading of the audiobooks, I'm linked into them anyway, so their energy is informing things. But when it comes to the tuning, I step out and let them do their thing, so that it's fully present at that level. And I mean, the first time I think I did it, the poor sound engineers didn't know what to make of it. I laughed it off, but here's this strange man singing this note, and
Right.
again and again and again sometimes. So yeah, it's I'm glad that the energy is so present in the audiobooks. And I've heard from people over the years that like they were listening to the audiobooks on in their car on the way to work, and they had to pull over on the side of the road. It just got
Hmm.
too steeped, so something's happening.
What I find happening when I'm listening to the audiobooks is, especially with the attunements, I'll have these shivers. I can physically, tangibly feel the attunement happening, and so yeah, I can see why I would not want to be driving, and for some
Mhm.
of the, especially when the attunement's happening, because I can feel it running through my body.
Yeah, yeah.
So since the publishing of this book, we've seen some major changes in the world. And so many would say, looking out into the world, which is, as they explain, we're in agreement to, uh, it would appear that things are moving backwards. There's more wars and there's more conflicts and things are changing. But they also talk about that what we're seeing, and they kind of explain why the chaos in the world is still a part of this process.
Yeah, it's a dismantling in some ways. It's a seeing of how we're participatory to a mess, you know. How can I say this? This book was dictated before and completed. I don't know what the dates are. It's in the book, the dates of the dictation. It precedes what's been happening in the Middle East since last October.
Okay.
So all of the books seem to be speaking to what's happening around the time that the books are published, in my opinion, and they're referencing. So they were dictating. I think it began maybe with the Book of Innocence, but which came before it. They were speaking so much about war, and people were saying, why are they speaking? We're not at war. No, there's no war right now, and I think the stuff in the Ukraine was happening, maybe just starting at that time.
Mhm.
But they've really been kind of on point. And this goes back to the beginning. I suspect if somebody wanted to sort of chart the books and look at when they were dictated, they're usually published about a year after the dictation is completed, and chart the progress of the world, they might be surprised. The Book of Truth was dictated right before the first Trump presidency, and about 4 days before the election, maybe 3 days. This actually channeling's up online still. The guys did a lecture called Great Change, and at the time, everybody expected that Clinton would win that election, and the guide said, What's about, he said, you think you want to talk about choice. He said, choice in your minds is I'll have the milk or the cream. But what you're about to deal with is when the table holding the milk and the cream is turned over on its side. It's like everything is about to get different. And they spoke in Book of Truth a lot about excavation, things being brought to the surface to be seen. And those teachings predated a lot of stuff, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, a lot of things that were coming forward that were challenging and uncomfortable and perhaps needed to be seen and come up in order for us to be able to move beyond them, the old ideas of what should be.
Mhm.
And it all finally, I think, is based in how we treat one another, and how we do our best.
Have you got any impressions that they don't say exactly what's going to happen, but they provide impressions since this last election of what we have in store, or what things we're going to be excavating or learning from this process?
Is that a question? No. I mean, I don't, they're rarely explicit.
Right.
I think, it's actually funny because I don't remember this, and I'd love to hear the recording of it
Hmm.
because I know it's out there somewhere. I did an interview with somebody, I don't remember who it was, maybe in 2000, early 2020, maybe 2009, probably 2019 it would have been. And they said, they were talking about a very big thing that was going to happen. And in New York, where I lived at the time, is going to be greatly impacted. And I was like, what's this about? And some interviewer, I guess, had heard that lecture and said, what is it? What is it? What is it? And I said, I don't get that information. And they finally said, it's like a virus, or it's a medical
Yeah.
issue. And I think they kind of nailed it. And I'm uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, I can
I'm
imagine.
very, very clear about not promoting fear. And I think that we can choose to be frightened about anything we want to. But the guides I work with have said about 1,000 times the action of fear is to claim more fear. Every choice we make in fear gets us more of the same. And we're being invited to fear and invited to hate and invited to, demonize people. We're buying into this whole, I hate the word matrix, but this whole matrix of fear.
Hmm.
We're supporting it. We're co-creating all of this stuff through consciousness. So what have they been talking about? They've been talking about a lot. And again, it precedes the last election. I don't remember the recordings mostly. But before the last elections, they started to talk about how we were moving into a time, it felt like they were talking about disruption in a very large way. And all of their lectures in the last 2 months or so have been about how to maintain one's balance in what they call the upper room in spite of any kind of onslaught that would be inviting us to step back down. Now, this is not a teaching of spiritual bypassing or ignoring things. It never has been. But it is about alignment and the level of alignment that we can hold, which will support others. And they say we'll claim a world in a higher way. It's simple, we're in vibrational accord with everything that we see, like it or not. If I can see it, I'm in accord with it. It means if I'm in accord with it, it means I've got a relationship to it. How that relationship plays out in some ways is up to me. And if I can move to a higher level of consciousness or vibration and lift what I see, which is simply by claiming the presence of the divine where it has been denied, I'm actually supporting the transformation of what I see. When people say after any school shooting, blessings and prayers, and it's used as a sort of a sign off and a write off and a platitude, the guides, I think, would say, what you bless blesses you in return, and to bless something is to claim the presence of the divine where it has been denied or refuted, or where fear seems to be holding sway. And in doing so, you're actually altering the thing seen. And again, it's an energetic teaching. It's not a pacifier. It's really not. It's
Hmm.
it's it's the potency of the divine spark, whatever you want to call it, that is within all of us, that in an amplified state can really transform reality.
What the guides do so well is to teach the power of a single word and the meaning of it and the concept and how it completely transform. There's some words they really focus on in this teaching. The first would be the all, and that we've talked. Of course, they've talked about that in every one of their teachings, but I really felt they kind of parsed what that meant and why, even though when we say the all, there a lot of times we don't mean it, and they
Yeah.
tried to clarify that.
I don't know. I mean, every book they unpack something.
Yeah.
Very often there'll be, when they bring a teaching through, I generally hear from a student that they first reference the teaching a book or two before.
Mhm.
And then they unpack the meaning of the word, or the meaning of the attunement or the phrase. And the all, I suspect, was preparing us for where they're going, which is this teaching of union, of divine union, of moving beyond the idea of separation, which they say finally is an idea, and just an idea, that we have calcified through our agreement to it. We've made it so and continue to find evidence for it and give us every reason why it shouldn't be different. I mean, we all know, like, a country is an idea. The
Mhm.
name of the country is an idea. A border is an idea. In fact, the ground doesn't stop. Maybe you meet the sea, and that's the end of a boundary. But all of the boundaries that we've erected are just ideas. And so we think, well, there has to be a border, there has to be a boundary. Well, only because we have made it so. And so when you begin to move beyond those ideas, you move to another level of agreement to what can be. And then you can move to the all. You know, I can't move to, when I decide, and I do this still because I'm not enlightened or ascended, and I don't pretend to be, but when I'm pissed at somebody, or if I'm holding somebody in darkness, as the guides would say, I know that I'm putting myself right beside them. Who you put in darkness calls you to the darkness, which is probably the same teaching as, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespassed against us. Same idea, I
Mhm.
suspect. We don't forgive other people to make it easy for them. We're doing it to release ourselves from the cording and the bondage that we place ourselves in through our own condemnation. But this allows us to go someplace else and have a different thing. So I know that when I do this, I suffer. And the guides have said, if you deny the God in anyone else, you've denied it in yourself. It's that simple. You cannot be the light and hold another in darkness. It's hypocrisy. You look at any religion that damns other people, you've got a religion that's operating in separation, and in my opinion, without God.
Mhm.
You've got a set of ideas and tenets, and everybody likes to feel more special, and we get to go to heaven and they don't. But as if you're denying the inherent divinity in the one before you, which is the idea that we're all of the same source and expressions of the same source coming from different backgrounds, different ways of being, until we can move to that level, we're going to have problems. The guides I work with said we have been at war as a species since the first person picked up the first rock and threw it at somebody else. And they said it's the same war, it just comes in different names. It's the same war we've been fighting since we could pick up a rock and toss it. And the time has come for us to realize that and move beyond it. As long as we think it's a solution, we have the great capacity and ever increasing capacity to blow ourselves up to the point of no return.
The other concept that they emphasize is new, and it feels like this is the beginning of this transformation. I'm sure that they're going to talk about this when you make all things new, and the fact and these changes from where we're at to where we're going, and I found that to be another fascinating aspect of this.
It's really interesting, and it's an
Mhm.
attunement, and
It
it's a
is.
simple claim. Behold, I make all things new, which I didn't know. I think when they first spoke, it was actually in the book of Revelation. I mean, it's a teaching in there.
Yes.
And it's the Christed self or the divine self, the risen self, the monad Christ in expression, as in through us, that makes that claim from the upper room upon all that it sees. Behold, I make all things new, which is the re-seeing of matter. And the re-see people think this is about fixing things. I don't think this is about fixing things. I think it's about re-knowing, re-seeing, reclaiming things in a higher awareness, with the idea that consciousness can alter the manifest world and does. Somebody's got to have the idea to build the dam, and then that stops the town from getting flooded. Somebody has the idea, to put a roof on a structure to keep the rain from coming. And all of these things were once just ideas, and now they're part of a reality. So the idea that we can know things in a higher way or have a higher experience of things shouldn't be a surprise, but it's an attunement. When the guides work with it in groups, and when I do live events, they're doing all of the attunements with people and having them work with each other, and the energy is very palpable. But it is a re-seeing that occurs, and people are often seeing their partners literally just turn into energy. It's really quite trippy what can happen in these things.
Yeah, it is remarkable. And so I would just like to tell the guides thank you for the opportunity to live in a time when I can go through these attunements and hear their words. And I often am very grateful because of their teachings, because um, they've nurtured me. I'm somebody that I want it now. That's my personality. I want everything now. I want the immediate transition. I want it all to happen now. And they've taught me patience and
Mm.
really let me to see the bigger picture of there's no way for me to go through these attunements and changes immediately. It takes time, and they're building a structure. And that's what it feels like what they're doing is plank by plank by plank over time with these teachings. And that's what's amazing about it.
Well, that's great to hear. I'm happy they're working with you and for you in all those ways. I'm always a little surprised that anybody's reading these books still after all this time, because my experience is so private when they're being dictated. When the teaching is done, I just go about my business. So, I don't
Yeah.
have the same experience that you do reading the books. I'm too
Yeah.
busy, being the machine that they work through.
Well, as an avid reader, it's the first time that I read a book and had a physical response to the
Hmm.
book, which you have reported other people have said as well. That
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I can't believe I'm feeling this, and it's not psychosomatic. I know for sure that this is doing something to me, which is
Yeah.
amazing.
The guide said in the very first book, they said, this is a book that that is going to be experienced more so than read, and that the real teaching is the vibration that's informing every word on the page.
Right.
That's real conversation that's happening, and that the words in the paragraphs is really providing a context for the intellect to understand what's happening energetically more than anything else. When the first book was published in 2010, nobody knew who I was. I mean, I was this college teacher. I certainly was not on the circuit as a channeler. There wasn't a circuit, I don't think, at that time. And people started leaving reviews on Amazon, and saying, I'm reading this book and my body's vibrating. I'm reading this book and I'm seeing auras. It was just again and again and
Mhm.
again. And then people started buying crates of the books and distributing them to friends. One guy was leaving copies in airports for people to find because he said, you really can't give people this book, but they can discover it for themselves. It was a little wacky, but that's been the case with all of them, and a lot of reports of people, and including some of the people that were there when the book was being dictated and were reading the chapters, as I would type them. There were a couple of people who would get it were having the experiences as well, and quite potent ones. So that's the guides, that's not me, and it seems to be the case with every book, and the experiences seem to continue. But it's a conversation that you're probably having with the guides more so than.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate everything with the books, but let's get to know you a little bit better. Uh, um, you've gotten a chance through these teachings to travel the world. Tell me the your favorite place that you've got a chance to travel to.
I don't know, truthfully. I love a lot of places I go, but I'm not a very good tourist. So this summer, I'm going to be doing a week in, I think, Manchester, England, at a center. And then I've got a week off, and then I go to northern Italy to the Italian Alps, and I'm going to be channeling there, which I was there last year. It's just beautiful. I
Amazing.
actually have a whole week off between them, and I kind of want to go because I've never been to Florence, because I actually have some of the little past life stuff that I know about that I have is there, during the Renaissance, and that's trippy stuff. So I've got some places to visit and some karma to clear out, I think. But I have to say this work has given me a life I would not have expected and or dreamed of. I'm still pretty much a hermit in many ways. I'm shy socially. I'm good in front of a group because I taught college for so long. I got to be good at that. But left up to my own devices, I'm happy to be here with my two little dogs and, in a very beautiful island, Maui.
Mhm.
But I don't know. My life is my life. I'm right now so in my personal history because I'm trying to document some of it in a book. And that's not always pleasant because my journey has not been necessarily a very polite one. People think sometimes that, and some people do, they have a spiritual opening and it's all rainbows and unicorns and everything is just blissed out from there on in. And my experience was not that. It was quite challenging and can still be sometimes. I'm not done yet, but I'm grateful for it.
Yeah.
It's not what I would have expected. I was not on the menu of my options when I was growing up. Who would have thought? I didn't even really believe in channeling. And I just know that I do it and I know that it happens. And beyond that, everybody else can have their own opinion about it if they want to or not at all.
As a former drama teacher, I'd love to know your favorite movies. Um,
Oh, how interesting. They're dark. They're spooky. I mean, there's a lot of them. I have a
I
lot of.
love that.
No, my mom took me to see Rosemary's Baby when I was 7. My mother didn't like the playground, so I saw everything in the 60s as it came out.
Right.
Completely not age appropriate. I was in the second grade when I saw that. I think Easy Rider was in the third grade. You name it, I saw it. Medium cool, that blew my mind, but it was terrifying. So, but I don't know. I have a lot of favorite movies, and in a weird way, that's almost too personal. That's almost too much of a window into me.
Movies have always been spiritual for me, and so sometimes I even go through guilt, like I shouldn't be watching all these movies, but I unpack such amazing experiences from watching movies. It's like I'm experiencing a life sometimes in a single 2 hour period, and
Yeah,
so
I mean,
it's always
I grew up going to the movies, and I was a
yeah.
film addict, and I taught playwriting and screenwriting when I was a college teacher. And my aesthetic was highly informed by what I saw as a kid. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them, but I tend to like movies that end with transcendence, even if the transcendence is kind of loopy or not that healthy. You know, if we
Yeah,
think at the end of Sunset Boulevard, that lady is transcending. She's just gone off into her own madness.
right.
So, yeah, it's a part of my life too, and a big one.
Yeah, for sure. So well, I just wanted to thank you so much for having the opportunity to talk with you and your experience with the guides. Thank the guides for their amazing teachings. It's always an honor to speak with you, and I wish you the very best. Everybody should check out the new book, A World Made New. I will put a link in the description. And welcome to the Reality Revolution, Paul.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
We return you now to your local announcer.